Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Gerald Tang. I'm the Assistant Dean for Career Integrations at St. Francis College. Today's session is on job interviews. So I will be spending some time talking about the job interview process and tips and strategy in which how you can prepare yourself for any job and internship interviews that's coming up as well. By the end of today, we're hoping that you all will be able to learn about the most important aspects. The 4 different types of interview questions, which many of the students who always ask us how to prepare for interview, those are typically the 4 different types of questions that most employers will be asking you, regardless of what industry or choice that you will be going into. The second part, I'm hoping at the end of today, you'll be able to describe the framework on how to answer behavioral interview questions. Those are the questions that typically students get stuck on, or they may be unsure how to articulate some of these answers. And I'll give you a particular framework in which you can be able to use as you're answering some of the questions that are behavioral questions. So what are the behavioral questions? I'm going to mention it here. Behavioral questions are questions that usually come up with, tell me about a time, give me an example, provide me a scenario. Some of you might have heard of some of these behavioral questions as you go through some sort of interview throughout your experiences and through your career as well. So I'll give you a framework in which how you can answer some of these questions in a more precise manner. So again, like I said, today's topic, we're going to talk about what employers are really looking for, what you can expect regarding interview questions that I just mentioned earlier, and how you can prepare for the interview. I'll give you more specific tips and insight on how you can prepare for phone and online interview, which obviously now it's become even more popular as many employers are going to be doing both virtual and remote interview process. And some of you may also heard of the conversation about HireVue, which is a particular video interview platform that many larger companies are using as a first round interview, where they give you a video recording for you to record your response back. The product they use, most of them will call HireVue. Those are really intended for an opportunity for them to do initial phone screen or even a video screening as you're recording your response to some of the questions ahead of time and then send it in. So that's become even more popular with companies using that as a strategy to filter some of the candidates out throughout the process itself. So I'll give you some tips on how you can also prepare for some of these HireVue questions and HireVue interview as well. So let's talk about the purpose, like I mentioned earlier. The purpose of the interview as you get to the stage of your search process. Let's say you put together your resume, you put together your application material, you did your networking to make connection with companies, you apply for these opportunities, and let's say you get a phone call from an employer. That's where the interview process begins. At that point of the interview process, most of employers are not really concerned about the idea of whether or not you can do the job. The question becomes whether or not what they see and what they read on the job application matches the person that they're seeing in front of you. So as they really using the interview process as a way to assess who you are, not just on paper, but the in-person experience, and also whether or not are there any potential risk and factors that they can see you can bring to the table or things that they need to be concerned about. So ultimately, the question for the employer is really to assess whether or not you will fit into the company and some of the skills that they're looking for to fulfill the roles that they have for openings. But for you, this is also an opportunity for you to really articulate your strengths and skill set, your qualification on things that can demonstrate to an employer you are the best candidate for them. At this stage, again, like I said earlier, it's not about whether or not you are able to complete the job or do the task. So with that in mind, your job is not about like whether or not I really need to worry about employer thinking I'm not going to be able to do this task. Your focus should become how you can be able to share your skill set and what you can bring to the table front and center to the employers so that they can see and validate some of the impression that they can get from your application material itself. It's also an opportunity for you to learn more about them. So you may read a very good job description. You may read a lot of good things about their company on the company website or social media. This is also a time for you to learn more about them. This is a time for you to assess whether or not this is a place that you can see yourself working in those internship or full-time opportunity. As you think about the employer perspective, there's really three main questions that they really want to assess you through the interview process, right? The first question is, can you do the job? That's where they can see, okay, do you have the skill set? Let's say you say that you are good at certain things on your resume. Does that matches what they hear from you about that particular skills and training or software or knowledge? What types of personality can I see you working in the company? How can I see you showing up at work, right? What types of quality might you bring to the workplace itself? And what are the reasons why you want to work for this company as well? Why this is a potential right place for you, and how much you may know about the organizations. And the second part that kind of fall into what I just mentioned in a second ago, will you be able to do the job, right? Is it the right reasoning that you apply for the job, or you just say, I just want anything, and you're just the lucky person to actually call me for that opportunity? So in other words, do you have an interest and understanding what the company is about and why you're interested in this opportunity, how that might fall into the long-term career plans that you might have, or the industry that you decide to move forward with. The third part is ultimately, will you fit in, right? I see you working in the organization? Do you align with some of the things that the company are looking for and even the missions of the organization? That's an example why it's so important for any job seeker. When you get to this stage, it's really understanding the company culture and environment to see how you can see your philosophy and your knowledge of the company show up in the interview process. So what else are employers generally looking for? This is really universal across many and all of the company and industry that many of you might be interested in. Obviously, somebody who can speak and write professionally, right? Can you write a professional email? Can you articulate yourself precisely, both verbally and in written communications? Are you able to, articulate your thoughts more precisely in front of a client? Can you work in a team environment? What qualities and what type of leadership do you bring into any workplace, any teamwork, right? What are some of the knowledge of the company? Why do you want to work at this particular company? How much you know about the project and the overall product and services this particular company provides you? Can you able to problem solve, right? What are some of the things they can demonstrate your skill set, whether or not it's analytical or problem solving skills? Even like how you tackling a scenario at work, how do you do that in your previous work experiences that demonstrate to me that you have the ability to tackle any challenging scenario or problems that might occur in any other work environments. Do you really want to work in this company, right? Why do you really interested in working for this organization? Why not their competitors? What makes you feel like this is the right place for you? As well as the attitude and the excitement, right? You can always see somebody who's really interested in working in this particular company when you can see the interview shine through that personality, that excitement, that eagerness. So it's so important for you to think about as you're going through the process, have these information in mind to understand what employers are looking for. So your job as a job seeker is to then go back and think about how I can be able to articulate some of these qualities from my past experiences to match with what employer potentially are trying to learn about you through the interview process. So these are the usually four main type of questions that any and all employers are typically looking for. This is the part where you want to prepare yourself in any and all of these scenarios. So the first type of question I call it factual or traditional questions. These are questions that everybody sort of expected to prepare for. Questions like, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why are you wanting to work in this company? What have you learned about the industry? What are your career goals? And something you will notice about that is these questions always start with the why and the what, or the how. These are typical questions. They want to get a direct response from you. Like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? You want to prepare yourself with a response that is very precise and clear. You don't want to go on and on with the story behind why that becomes your strengths or why that becomes your skill set. That's why I describe it. These are factual questions. Focus on the factual response of your answer. So tell me about yourself can be a little bit longer than factual, but you do want to think about the mindset of what do you want the employer to write down on the piece of papers about you. So the example of tell me about yourself could be, hi, my name is Gerald. I'm currently a junior at St. Francis College studying biology. I'm always interested in doing more research about biological science, particularly things to do with medical and field related to research. So that could be things you want to start to write down, right? What employer think about me is myself, maybe my major, maybe my interest, and potentially what the career path I want to go into. You always want to start with the tell me about yourself with a little bit about your background, but then you want to add more qualities about you. So in that response itself, I will then further explain a bit about my background and what I've learned. You can then say something along the line of from my past experiences. I've done some research experiences in the lab at St. Francis College, where I've exposure in understanding how to follow lab procedures and the importance of having important safety and guidelines that need to follow as I'm doing any of these experiments. From these experiences, I've learned that, so keyword there, I've learned that the importance of following appropriate protocol, understanding how to do research, and be able to document any of these process and procedure for everyone to follow. So even that could be a very good tell me about yourself response itself, because not just I talk about my background, things related to the job I want to go for, a little bit about my skill set. So you want to highlight skills and focus on the lessons learned, because the lessons learned is what ties back to the previous slides about what employers are looking for, right? Like I mentioned earlier, from my example, it gives you a clarity of what that one or two skill set that I already acquired, that I've learned about, that I can potentially bring into the new environment or new organizations. So you tell me about yourself need to be well thought out and well articulate, and you want to think about what you want them to jot down on the piece of paper as you're presenting this message to them. They're not going to remember every single word you said. They're going to remember one or two keywords about you. So you want to make sure that you emphasize some of these elements as you're describing those. Try not to go into detail, like I said to you, because as you're explaining into a storytelling approach in some of these questions, people are not going to remember ultimately one or two things about you. They're going to remember the story. And that story may not be the most important selling point you want them to know. So an example, I just pose it here, right? What courses have you taken in this field? You can simply respond, the three main classes I've taken are organic chemistry, biology, 101, and also, anatomy and physiology, for example. So you can just highlight those three things for them without going into detail about anything else. So again, factual question means fact and evidence. Focus on explaining those facts and evidence of the answer. So pay attention to those questions and then focus on the answering the factual aspect of the response. The second type of questions we call behavioral questions. That's the part of questions that always start with tell me about a time, give me an example, provide me a scenario. Those are places where people want to learn about your past experiences as a predictions of your potential performance at work. So in other words, they want to get a sense of how do you handle yourself in some of these scenarios as a way for me to get a better idea of what you will be like in this new environment that I'm recruiting you for. So in a second, I'm going to explain to you a particular method and framework that you can answer these behavioral questions. But just hold that thought a second. Anytime you hear, tell me about a time, give me an example, provide me a scenario, focus on one specific example, one specific framework, one specific evidence that you can use from your past experiences to respond to that question. The keywords always right after that wording itself. So for example, here, tell me about a time you initiated a project or change at work. So the keyword is how you initiate one project or one change at work. I don't need to know 2 or 3 things, just one thing that you want to be able to articulate to me that show that you have this particular skill set. The third type of question we call scenario-based questions, like a what-if questions. So these are questions that people want to ask you to gauge a sense of how you problem solve. For example, here, if you were leading a team, how would you handle a strong disagreement among your team member? So you may not have necessarily an environment where you had a disagreement, but this is a scenario where they want to get a sense from you what will happen if this scenario happens. So if you hear the word, hypothetically speaking, you were in a work environment where you deal with a challenging client, how did you handle this? Or they may give you a case studies or a scenario that give you a situation to answer. I ask you, how do you address this? How do you resolve this? I mean, just put you in a setting and ask you a particular response. Those are situational question. Again, the idea is to understand how you problem solve. So your goal is to then break down into different pieces. If I were leading a team and I had a disagreement among my team member, here are the 2 things that I will do. Here are the 3 things I will do. Here's one thing that I will focus on. So be clear about your step-by-step in how to respond to some of these scenarios. Don't worry about whether or not you have an example from the past, but break it down into pieces as you're following along the answer of when following the question and trying to answer the actual question itself. The last type of question that most people will get, we call technical questions. Question to gauge your interest to the industry. So at any industry you want to go into, there's always going to be question to gauge how much you know about the field, how much you know about the environments you'll be in or the companies you're in. And your job is to prepare yourself to understand what this company is about, what the industry trends are, so that you feel like you can be able to speak intelligently about the organization or the environment itself. They will always going to ask you questions about technical type of question to gauge how much you know about the company. One simple question that anybody asks you that you should always prepare for is, why do you want to work at this organization? That itself is also a technical question because they want to gauge more about your interest besides the factual evidence types of response. Okay, so let's focus a bit about behavioral questions here. Behavioral question, like I said earlier, to refresh your memory, behavioral questions always start with, tell me about a time, give me an example, provide me a scenario. This is the framework that I want you to write down. I call it the SARA or the STAR method, which is situations, tasks, actions, and result. Or some people might hear the word SARA, which is situations and tasks, actions, result, and applications. So those are pretty much intertwined when you are thinking about ways to answer any question that you hear. The minute you hear the word, tell me about a time where you do this, or give me an example where you have to, those are, we call behavioral questions. So the way how you answer the question will be, what is the situation, the problem that you're trying to address? How did you actually handle that? What action did you take to address them? What is the outcomes of it? And the application. The most important part of this type of questions is about the application. What did you learn from this type of questions? So let me give you an example of that. Tell me about a time you have to deal with a challenging client in a previous workplace. So when you hear that example itself, the idea is to understand from your past experiences, how do you deal with a challenging client, right? So the way how you answer that is very specifically that you can think about from your resume, where did you have a challenging scenario? So an example could be, when I was working in Starbucks, I have to deal with a challenging customers in front of me where I was having a problem hearing the order and we was not able to address the exact orders the persons were trying to get. So the person was very upset about it. So that's a situation I just explained, right? Or the task, what happened. So then the next thing you can say, in that situation, what I did was instead of trying to argue or trying to come up with a solution, we just go ahead and apologize and be able to take the new orders in so that we can diffuse the scenario quickly in front of us. That's an action. So what happened? The clients was fine with the response as we apologize and provide the clients with the proper drinks order that the clients was requesting. So it was fine at the end that the clients was happy about the response that we provided. So that's the result. But that's not enough because that just give me a story, right? So you think about why would employer want to know that? Because we're not hiring you from a Starbucks again, right? You're not interviewing the same type of job. So the application is what makes it unique, because at that time you want to end with what you learned. Say from that experience, I have learned that it's important to put the clients first in the scenario and trying to demystify any challenges that is happening in the public environment and trying to address it privately as much as I can, so that it's not interrupting other clients in front of people, but at the same time, we're trying our best to creatively address any situations privately or explore ways to improve that. Right, so that response itself, it gives me the most important part of what the employer wants to know. It's how did you address that? What did you learn from it? That now I can see that same chain of thought can happen in the workplace that I'll be hiring you for. Again, the framework is situations, task, actions, and result. Always focus on spending time on explaining your actions, your result, and your application. That's the most of that should be most amount of time you spend on it. Most students get stuck on explaining the scenario, trying to set up the whole entire situation and the framework without spending time on addressing what did you learn from that. So focus on shortening the first part of your response, but do address the application and the outcome and the lessons learned when you hear any of those questions. Again, on Handshake, under the Resources tab, under the Career Center tab, I put in 100 behavioral questions that you can practice. So you can certainly use any of these particular framework to try to practice some of these questions to prepare for any of your upcoming interview. Again, it's all housed in Handshake under the Career Center Resources tab. So now that you have a sense of the type of question, you want to think about how you can then prepare for any and all of these interviews. The first thing you want to always think about is prepare by doing your research about the company or the industry type you want to go for. You want to at least know what the companies you are interviewing for. What do they do besides what is on their website? Take a look back at the job description so they can see what you actually apply for, what they're asking you for the qualifications, what are some of the bullet points that is listed in the job descriptions. That is an important document for you to start thinking about example and evidence that you can start to think of from your resume that you can articulate to an employer. So something to ask me, how do I truly prepare and anticipate questions? The response will be anything that you see on the job descriptions or what you know about the job, and the expectation of the job tells you what will be example of things that you want to start to focus on and articulate at the interview stage. So go back to the job ads and see what are they asking for? What are some of the tasks they're expecting this person to do? And think about example that you can now think of. Doesn't matter if it's coming from an internship or club activities. It could be a volunteer gig or class project that you did that demonstrate you have some of these quality for this type of company, for this opportunities. Be prepared for speak about anything. I always say this is also a time to think about your interest on your resume. If you have an interest on your resume, prepare for interesting and cool stories about you. Because they may see the bottom of your resume and say, oh, you love play sports. Talk to me about a sport. Then you can start to explain and articulate an interesting side about you that can be available on the resume that anybody can then ask you. One of the questions that I always ask students to prepare for, name something that's not listed on your resume that I should know about you. Think about what else you can bring in to talk about your hobby, your interest, or personality, or things that will be really cool for people to know about you. Doesn't matter if it's career related or not career related, because that gives an employee a sense of your skill set. And by the way, that's the actual question that people ask me when I interview for this job. So it's indeed some people ask me personally for that as well. So prepare for things that you can start to continue to talk about and sell about you from your interview. Prepare questions at the end. At the end of any interview, most employers can ask you, what questions do you have for me? You don't want to say, no, I'm good. You answer all my questions, because that shows me that you're not interested or you have not prepared for the interview. Ask yourself the question, what do you really want to know? What are some of the things that you might have read about online, but you now want to ask those individuals in front of you a little bit about the company, the culture, the environment, the background, the expectations. Those are things you want to prepare for. Always prepare for at least 2 to 3 questions for each interviewer that you want to go into, and prepare for those, because that's where you want to show more about your interest. Try not to ask what's the salary expectations, how many vacation days do I get from this job, because again, it projects a specific type of impressions. Ask questions related to the job and the company, the environments, or things related to the job that will make you successful. Because then don't forget, you are here to also evaluate them. So use this time to ask those questions can be useful as well. Practice. Oftentimes people want to go into interview and they're like, oh, I can take care of it, no problem, because I know how to speak in front of people. But the reality is you're going to get nervous in any interview stage. You want to practice your answer and rehearse your answer loud, because the more you can practice your interview, the better you feel comfortable articulating yourself, talking about your skill set, be more precise with your response, and knowing what might be questions that you can start to prepare for that doesn't need to come up on the spot for questions that you want to ask them at the end. So always practice some of those and prepare ahead of time. Things to consider for any phone and virtual interview. You know, oftentimes we have always encouraged students to prepare for in-person interview, which is super important and helpful, especially nowadays. These in-person interviews may no longer be available. Many of those may be replaced by virtual interview. So the way how you look, the way how you present yourself in front of the camera matters. So focus on paying more attention to many other elements that you might not control about. For example, you might not see the cue of the person, right? Do they look like they are paying attention to you? Are they having the cameras off the whole time? You cannot gauge that body language and that nodding, that smile across the table. So your job as a job seeker is to make sure you bring that energy into the space. Imagine I'm just talking to you right now in very soft, mundane, flat tone. You're gonna be like, I'm not interested in talking to you, right? Same goes to an interview process. You wanna be animated, you wanna show that excitement, you want to make sure that you have a clean professional background. You want to make sure that you dress appropriately for the job you want to go for. You want to make sure your roommate is not walking behind you, right? You are not sleeping on the bed, talking to them. Those are things that might seem pretty okay in some scenario. talking to your friend, but that again is the first impression that people want to create about you, right? Even think about basic things. Is the sound okay? Is the internet stable? Those are things you want to think about. Maybe the best scenario is to call in through the phone if you're doing a Zoom interview, or having a backup phone line in case something got disconnected, right? Those are things you want to always plan for it. Create a good impressions about you matters a lot. Other interview question tips: smile. Smile makes somebody feel warm and welcomed, right? Also the camera, if it's tilted all the way to the bottom, you make you look small, or you center in front of your screen. Those are important elements you want to think about to show that you are owning that interview process as well. Especially for virtual and phone, you have the option to have a notepad next to you. It's okay to write down one or two things as people asking you questions. You're not right there to writing down a lecture, so you want people to see in your forehead the whole time, but you want to kind of show that confidence and say, okay, now I can write one or two things about you. So about that interview question. So those are things you can certainly do, but keep your answer very clean, very clear and precise. Again, you don't want to mumble on, especially for a phone interview. It's harder for the person to hear about you. Pause in between to repeat the question is okay, right? If you can't hear the question, you can politely ask them to, can you repeat that? Even on Zoom, turn on that particular piece about audio or the transcription. You can always ask the person to do that if they're doing a Zoom interview as well, because you can now read the questions a little bit easier, even though it's a conversation between 2 or 3 of you. Again, always prepare to ask questions, regardless of phone or virtual interview. Doesn't matter if the first interview you talk to them or the 5th interview you talk to them. Always prepare many variety questions to show that you're interested in learning about the job. The day of the interview, if you're doing anything in person, you want to make sure you know that the company locations will be where you're meeting them. Try not to meet in any places that's too private, especially if you're going for a startup company and if they have home address. Try to meet in a cafe, try to meet in somewhere public that you can protect yourself. Knowing the name of the company, knowing the name of the people you'll be on the interview, it's okay for you to ask them the questions. What are the names of the interviewer that I can expect if you have multiple people to be involved in your interview itself? If you're coming for an in-person interview, making sure you arrive a little bit early, but not an hour early, not 2 hours early, because you're going to make somebody feel uncomfortable, feeling that you need to rush to get things ready for you for the interview stage. So if you arrive early, go somewhere else, gather your thought together before you walk into the door. Always prepare to be nice and be courteous with anybody and everybody. It's always important to make sure that you just don't know who will be part of the interview process, who are making those impressions for you. Bring copies of a resume, dress professionally for the job you want to go into. If this is a formal environment, office environment, dress up. We always want to prepare for it. If you know that it's going to be an interview at Google, dress a little bit nicer, not in jeans or t-shirt or shorts or sweatpants, because even though a company like Google, they still want to have you to dress a little bit more polished to make yourself more presentable in front of them. Always ask for contact at the end. Right now, if you're in person, ask for business card. If it's not at the end, ask them the next step of the process so you know when to follow up and how to follow up. Do always ask for the contact information so that you can do a thank you email at the end of your interview. Think about your verbal, whether or not you're in person or virtual. Are you smiling? Are you just fidgeting the whole time? Are you, slouching in front of you? Are you just kind of leaning at the bottom of the screen? I only see your forehead, but not your entire face, right? Those are impressions that people are making about you. Are you leaning back in the back of the chair? Are you really in front of it? I can see basically your wrinkle in your face, right? You're trying to think about your impressions and how you might look on screen or in person as well. Think about your posture, think about overall. There's a video out there I'm going to show really quickly about is a video for EY. I believe one of the accounting firm talking about virtual interview. I will send you guys a follow-up. I'll send you a follow-up with the video embedded so you can take a look at that. That gets some tips for you on how you can prepare for any of those interviews. Think about the 3 elements that you want to remember as you prepare for any interview. What's the purpose of it? Think about why do you want the job? Why do you want to work with this company? If you're not sure, it's okay to say no for any interview invitation. If you're like, I don't really know why I want this job, even though I applied for it, it's okay to decline, because last thing you want is wasting your time to create bad impressions about you and wasting their time if you are no desire, not interested at all. Prepare for your interview. Think about specific, feature about the company, the job that you're really interested in, and also what are some of the things about them that make you stand out. You want to prepare so much that you feel like you're ready to work for the company, and you know so much about the company that you can explain the product and services and even the company leadership team. Practice that. Practice out loud. Practice in front of a mirror. Practice in front of a Zoom recording. Record it and play back to see how you present yourself on camera, how you present yourself in person, how you present yourself over the phone. Record those, recordings and practices will give you a sense of, oh, maybe I'm fidgeting, I'm moving around, or I'm actually presenting myself pretty confidently in front of a camera. Always practice for interview. You can always schedule a mock interview with any one of us, including myself, as you're preparing for any interview coming up. Always follow up for after your interview. Within 24 hours, send a thank you email. If you're in person, if you're able to drop out a thank you note, great. If it's not, at least send a thank you email to anyone individually to thank them for the opportunity, thank them for the interview. Recall 1 or 2 things that you really want to highlight about the experience, that you want them to remember about you. What you appreciate about things you learn about the organization or the opportunity, or 1 or 2 things that makes you stand out that you want to highlight to them about your skill sets. Remember, you want to show the authentic you. So they want you to be successful on the job. They want to see the true you. Be gracious, even then if they are saying no to you, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes it's not about why are you not qualified. It's just there are different reasoning why they may be pursuing other opportunity instead. So it's okay if you get rejection. It's not the end of the world. Continue to move forward with that positivity and that energy. Always take care of yourself in the interview process. Like I said to you, on Handshake, there's really great resource available for you. Vault is something that we are available for you to access through our website as well. Glassdoor.com, it's a great way for you to search for the company you want to apply for. Just get a sense of what type of interview questions other people also mentioned about the company that you can also anticipate for it. You can always practice your interview through mock interview with us. So schedule that through Navigate app to prepare for your next interview as well. With that said, that's the end of today's session. Thank you again for the time, and I will see you next time. With that, I'm going to stop the recording.